In this Photoshop video, I'm going to show you how we can focus stack a set of images to come up with a super detailed close-up like this. Now, often with close-up photography, you'll find the depth of field is very shallow, even when using narrow apertures. And you can see here how I've taken a series of shots, and even though I'm using a fairly narrow aperture here of f8, you can see how my plane of focus is very narrow. So I've had to take several shots of the flower here while adjusting my focus point. Now, many cameras have this focus stacking feature that automatically adjusts your focus point for you. You could either use that, or you could just adjust the focus ring manually, of course, using a tripod to keep all your shots in alignment. So you can see over my series of frames, I've managed to capture sharpness across the flower, and then we can use a few simple tools in Photoshop to combine all the sharp parts into one image. So to begin with, we need to open up our set of images as a stack. So I'm going to highlight the first image here in the sequence, then hold Shift and highlight the last image here in Adobe Bridge. And then I'm going to go to the Tools menu here. I can go to Photoshop and I can load files into Photoshop layers. Now, after a few seconds, my set of images will open into Photoshop, and if I go to my layers panel here in Photoshop by going to Window, Layers, you can see how each image now occupies its own layer in my layer stack. So I have 19 different layers here. Now I can start blending them. Now I can just click on the top layer there, hold Shift and click on the bottom layer to select all of them, and then I can go to Edit, and we're going to use Auto Align Layers. We'll just leave it set to auto and hit OK. Now this will check the alignment of my layers and adjust them so that they match up perfectly. Now you'll find when you're shifting your focus point, the image will zoom in or out very slightly between each frame. So this alignment process here just helps to correct for that. And you can see because of that, we sort of see these messy edges around the frame here because some of my layers have been resized, but that just ensures that everything is in alignment. And now we can go to use the other auto feature here under the edit menu. We can go to Edit, Auto, Blend Layers. We can set this to stack images, check seamless tones and colors, and hit OK. And this will automatically seek out all the sharp parts on those individual layers and apply layer masks to each layer so that only the sharp areas on each are visible. And after a few more seconds, we can see now Photoshop has applied layer masks to each of these layers. If I just go through a few of these, you can see how we're able to build up all the sharp parts on each of these layers into one super sharp image. Now, it's not completely perfect. You'll often find with the auto blend command, it can leave sort of slightly blotchy areas. It sort of gets you 90% of the way there, but you might need to finish things off manually to make it perfect. So with my image here, there are these blotchy areas around the edges of the frame. I think there's also a sharper stalk that I'd like to use. I think if I go through each of these individual layers here, I can hold Alt and click the eye icon to hide all of my other layers. And I can hold Shift as well to temporarily turn off a layer mask. So I can see on this layer here, this has got a much sharper stalk than the one that's been blended with everything else. So if I find an area that I want to use that's sharper than the combined image, what I can do is grab the lasso tool and just make a loose selection of the area. So I'm going to make a loose selection of the area, making sure that layer is highlighted that I want to target. I can duplicate with Command or Control and J to copy that selected area to a new layer. And I want to bring this layer to the very top of my stack. I can use the keyboard shortcut for this, Command or Control plus Shift and the right square bracket key. And that will bring that layer to the top of the layer stack. And you can see if I toggle that layer off and on how now that stalk is much sharper. Now it's looking a little bit messy, but I can add a layer mask to it now. Grab my brush tool using black as my foreground color. I'll bring my opacity up to 100%. I can just paint around the edges here to get a better blend between my layers here. So you'll often find you need to finish off manually just to get a perfect result in some of these areas. So if we zoom in a little bit close here, we can see it's still looking a bit messy. So what I can do now is add a empty layer at the top of my layer stack. I can grab my spot healing brush tool. I can make sure sample all layers is checked up in the tool options, and I can just paint over any rough patches like this to try and improve them. That's looking a bit better. I can switch to my clone tool by hitting S, and again I'll set it to sample all layers. I can hold Alt to sample some pixels and then just paint to tidy up any little rough patches like this. So I'm just going to clone some of the background colors here in to tidy up on the stalk here like this. I could perhaps use a lower opacity for my clone tool by hitting 4 to set it to 40%, and then I can paint to clone more gradually, and that allows me to just blend patches that are looking a little bit rough. Just hold Alt again and just clone these little details around here. We'll see how we're looking now. I think that stalk's looking better. I think with these areas around the top here, what I could do is just crop in to remove them. So I'm going to grab my crop tool, crop in tighter to the edges of the frame like this, and bring the crop in on this side as well, and hit enter to apply. And if we zoom in closer, we'll see how we're looking. So you can see how I'm able to combine all of those frames into one really sharp, really detailed close-up image like this. There are a few areas that we might need to fine-tune, but for now that's looking pretty good. I think I'll finish off by adding a tonal effect on top of everything. So I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut Command or Control plus Shift, Alt and E. That will merge all of those layers below into one single layer, and I'm going to take this layer into the Camera Raw filter. So I'm going to go to Filter, Camera Raw filter. I'll go into my basic settings here. Let's perhaps just skew the colors slightly and maybe just lighten it slightly, add a touch of contrast, maybe a small amount of clarity here, increase the vibrance. Let's perhaps just up the highlights a touch. Maybe go into our profile browser here. I could go for one of these artistic profiles here just to give me a slightly different look to my image. I like this artistic 3 profile here, but perhaps I'll bring the amount down slightly, and I'm happy with that, so I'll hit OK. So there we go. That's how to focus stack a set of images in Photoshop using the Auto Blend command.